This is the digital channel of the General Overseas Service of All India Radio. I am Manoj Mainkar, and in the next half hour, I'll bring to you news updates from India and around the world, awareness videos on coronavirus by Government of India, and a lot more. We'll begin with the news updates.
This is the General Overseas Service of All India Radio. Namaskar. The news snippets. 29,70,492 people have recovered from COVID-19 in the country. In the last 24 hours, 68,584 recoveries were reported by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Recovery rate is 77.09%. 11,72,179 tests were conducted for COVID-19 in the past 24 hours. India has banned 118 Chinese apps. These apps have been banned as they were engaging in activities prejudicial to sovereignty and integrity of India, defense of India, security of state and public order. India has become one of the top 50 innovating nations in the Global Innovation List. The Global Innovation Index is a group of 131 countries that focus more on innovation than other countries. Switzerland, Sweden, and the US are the leading innovation countries in the list. The Union Cabinet has approved Mission Karam Yogi that will upgrade knowledge and skills of civil servants on a continuous basis with the aid of modern technology. Delhi could soon allow on-demand testing for COVID-19. The Lieutenant Governor has asked officials to prepare standard operating protocols (SOPs) for on-demand testing. A helpline number would also be launched soon. The centre has allowed 60% of pre-COVID level domestic flights to resume services. Tamil Nadu has allowed resumption of interstate train and bus services from 7th September. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has said Kremlin critic and Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny was poisoned by a Soviet-era nerve agent. Navalny is undergoing treatment in Berlin. His condition has been stated as non-life-threatening. Syrian official media has said that the troubled country's air defense systems have shot down Israeli drones. Brazilian and Paris Saint-Germain PSG football star Neymar has tested positive for COVID-19. And that is the end of the news snippets.
Every voyage is inspired by a natural human longing of people to see and explore a new world. Travelers in ancient days used to get information about new places from merchant groups. What such visitors recorded later revealed to us details of our ancient history. Much of our knowledge of ancient and medieval Indian history comes from the accounts of foreigners who as pilgrims, travelers and traders crossed the seas and difficult land routes to reach India. In their writings on their observations and experiences of a country new and strange to them, they left valuable contributions to the historical understanding of early Indian society. In our program Travelogue, we bring to you some of the foreign travelers' account of India and their understanding of Indian culture and civilization.
Yi Ching, whose name in English is variously spelt and pronounced as I Ching, Yi Ching, and Itzing, was a Chinese Buddhist monk of the Tang dynasty who travelled to India by sea during the latter half of the 7th century and studied at the famous Buddhist University of Nalanda for 11 years. Besides being a great Buddhist scholar and traveller, he was also a famous translator of Indian Buddhist texts into Chinese. Yi Ching's family name was Chang and first name Wan Ming. Unlike the other prestigious Chinese pilgrims Fa Xian and Xuanzang, not much is known about Yi Ching's family background and his early life, though there are some extant accounts in his own works, which are Nan Hai Chi Kwe Nei Fa Chuan, that is, an account of the Dharma sent back from the southern seas, Ta Thang Shi Yu Chiu Fa Kao Sang Chuan, that is, record of eminent monks who travelled to India in search of the Dharma during the Tang, and Sung Kao Sang Chuan, that is, records of eminent monks in the Sung dynasty. As indicated in these records, he was born in the 9th year of the San Quan era, that is 635 of the Common Era, during Tai Sung's reign in Fanyang, modern Zhuoqian, in Hebei province. The same records indicate that he came from a well-to-do family that had produced public officials for several generations. At the age of 7, Yi Ching was sent to a Buddhist monastery to the west of Qichou for the purpose of receiving ordination. At this monastery, he extensively studied the various Buddhist sutras and the Vinaya under two prominent Buddhist monks known as Shan Yu and Hui Shi. These two monks also took great care of him during his novitiate. Unfortunately, during his 12th year, his favorite teacher Shan Yu died. Thereafter, Yi Ching decided to lay aside the study of secular texts and began devoting himself solely to the critical study of the sacred Buddhist canon. Now he also began to think about traveling to India on attaining the age of maturity. After receiving full ordination at the age of 21, he did a special study for 5 years of the Vinaya and its principal commentaries. When Yi Ching was confident that he had mastered the Vinaya, at the suggestion of his teacher Hui Shi, he moved to Chang'an to learn about the Yogachar school. In the year 664, the great Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang's funeral was held in Chang'an, and this incident appears to have made a deep impression on Yi Ching. Unlike pilgrims before him, he could not take the land route to India across Central Asia and the Himalayas because of political turmoil in Tibet, Afghanistan, and the surrounding areas. Instead, he made his way to India by sea, taking a more southerly route. In November 671, Yi Ching embarked on a Persian ship sailing from South China to the Malay Islands. After having sailed for 20 days at sea, he disembarked at Jaya, the capital of Sri Vijaya, on the vast island of Sumatra. The monasteries on Sri Vijaya at this time were great centers of Buddhist studies. Here he spent about 6 months acquiring the elementary knowledge of Sanskrit. Traveling further on, he passed through the Strait of Malacca to the northwest tip of Sumatra, where he boarded a ship going to the Nicobar Islands. He recorded visits to the nations of Malayu and Kitte, Kedah, and recorded his impression of the Kunlun people using an ancient Chinese word for Malay people. About them he says, Kunlun people have curly hair, dark bodies, bare feet, and wear sarongs. In 673, after 10 days' travel across the Bay of Bengal, he reached the Naked Kingdom, southwest of Shu. Finally, in the second month of the year 673, Yi Ching arrived at the Indian seaport of Tamarlipti, the modern town of Tamluk in West Bengal. Here, Yi Ching studied Sanskrit for a year in the Buddhist temple of Vahara. In the following year, in the company of his new acquaintance from China, Ta Shangtang, Yi Ching set out on his pilgrimage to Magad. They followed a group of merchants from Tamarlipti. On the way, they encountered mountains, woods, and swamps on the way to Nalanda. Halfway to Nalanda, Yi Ching fell ill and was unable to walk. Gradually, he was left behind by the group. He was looted by bandits and stripped naked. He heard the natives would catch white skins to offer as a sacrifice to the gods, so he jumped into mud and used leaves to cover his lower body. Walking slowly, he reached Nalanda. From here, he paid a visit to Mount Gridharkut of Rajgir, viewed the Buddhist relics of Bodh Gaya, Kushinagar, and Mrigdav at Varanasi, and mounted the Kukuttapad Giri near Gaya. He also visited the Jetwan monastery at Shravasti and the heavenly stairs said to have been built by god Shakra for the Buddha to use in descending from heaven at Sankashya, and journeyed to Sarnath and Kukuttapad. Although no definite record as to which other countries and places in India I Ching had journeyed to, he gives the total number as more than 30 countries which he travelled across. After venerating the Buddhist sites, I Ching returned to the celebrated Nalanda University, where he spent 11 years from 675 to 685. Here he became friends with several other Chinese monks, particularly Xuanzao, Taolin, Wuxing, and Sihung. At the university, I Ching studied a large number of Buddhist texts relating to Buddhist logic, the Abhidharma Kosh, Vinaya, and the Madhyamik and Yogachar philosophies. He also collected some 500,000 Sanskrit stanzas that he believed would fill 1,000 volumes when translated into Chinese. With the manuscripts he had collected at Nalanda, I Ching began his return journey in 685 and took the same sea route by which he had travelled to India. When I Ching again arrived at Sri Vijaya in 687, at that time Palembang was a centre of Buddhism where foreign scholars gathered. I Ching praised the high level of Buddhist scholarship at Sri Vijaya and advised Chinese monks to study there prior to making the journey to Nalanda in India. In the fortified city of Bhog, Buddhist priests number more than 1,000 whose minds are bent on learning and good practice according to I Ching. They investigate and study all the subjects that exist. Just as in India, the rules and ceremonies are not at all different. If a Chinese priest wishes to go to the West in order to hear and read the original scriptures, he had better stay here 1 or 2 years and practice the proper rules. He also wrote that Buddhism was flourishing throughout the islands of Southeast Asia. According to him, many of the kings and chieftains in the islands of the southern sea admire and believe in Buddhism, and their hearts are set on accumulating good actions. While in Sri Vijaya, I Ching continued with his work to translate original Sanskrit Buddhist scriptures into Chinese. After 2 years, in 689, he found he needed more supplies for copying the Sanskrit manuscripts. He went to the port to send a letter to China requesting paper and ink, which were not available in Sri Vijaya at that time. While he was drafting his message, the ship unexpectedly set sail with him on board. On August 10, 689, he reached Guangfu, where he recruited 4 assistants. He returned with them to Sri Vijaya in December 689, and they remained there until 695, working on the translations. In Sri Vijaya, I Ching studied under the distinguished teacher Shakya Kirti and wrote an account of Buddhist practices and a report regarding a group of Chinese monks who had travelled to India in search of Buddhism. I Ching sent these reports together with his translations of Buddhist sutras to China with one of his assistants in 692. He also produced a detailed geographic account of his travels through India, through the East Indies islands, and also the Malay Peninsula. This written account is a rare account of the early history, culture, and religions of the people of Indonesia. In the midsummer of 695, he reached Luoyang, where he was given a grand reception by Empress Wu. His journey had taken amazingly 25 years in all. He brought with him about 400 Buddhist texts to China. By an imperial decree, I Ching was settled in Luoyang, where he devoted himself completely to the translation of Buddhist texts. In collaboration with an eminent monk from Khotan, Sikshanand, and also to learned Buddhist leaders Fuli and Fazang, I Ching completed the rendition of the Avatansak Sutra in the year 699. Between 700 and 703, He translated over 20 Buddhist works in 115 fascicles. According to the records in Kai Yuan Shi Chiao Lu, he is credited with translating altogether 56 works in 230 fascicles. Among these scriptures and treatises, 159 fascicles come under the category of the Vinaya texts, particularly of the Sarvastivada tradition. In addition, it is worth noting that according to the Zanjuan Shinti Shi Chiao Mulu, some extra works of 50 fascicles of the Sarvastivada Vinaya texts are also registered as I Ching's translations. Apart from the Vinaya texts, his translations of the Yogachar Sutras and of esoteric Dharanis are quite remarkable. Some of his well-known translations are the Mool Sarvastivada Vinaya, Golden Light Sutra in 603 of the Common Era, Diamond Sutra in 703 of the Common Era, Sutra of the Original Vows of the Medicine Buddha of Lapis Lazuli Radiance and the Seven Past Buddhas in 707 of the Common Era, and the Avadans in 710 of the Common Era. Interestingly, while doing his translation work, I Ching also took time to train his students in the Vinaya. Despite political turmoil and palace intrigues, I Ching continued his translation work till his death on February 16, 713. He was buried with great honors in a monastery of the national capital Chang'an and was posthumously given the title of Director of Foreign Office, Honglu Ching. Lu Kan, by imperial request, composed a memorial inscription. A temple called Chin Kuan Ming Gold Light was built at his burial site in 758. Being a renowned pilgrim in his time, I Ching's outstanding achievements were reminisced now and then by later generations. For instance, in the year 758, to commemorate his translation of the Swaran Prabhas Uttam Sutra, that is the Sutra of Golden Light, the then Emperor Suzong gave an order to build the Chin Kuan Ming Monastery in Chang'an. I Ching won an excellent reputation for being one of the very few Chinese pilgrims who successfully visited India and was devoted to spreading Buddhism by translating a variety of texts brought back from India. Added to this, he also expounded his knowledge of Sanskrit and his travel records in some exegetic works. He was the author of the earliest extant Sanskrit Chinese dictionary, Fan Yu Qian Ziyuan, that is 1,000 Sanskrit words. Although the translations of his predecessor Xuanzang overshadow those of I Ching, a sample examination of both renderings of the Vinshatik indicates that I Ching was a better translator than Xuanzang. I Ching, a prolific translator of Buddhist canon, was during his lifetime honored with the title Sanzang Fashi, Master of the Tripitak. His two most important writings are Nanhai Chi Kui Ne Fa Suan, that is an account of the Dharma sent back from the southern seas, and Tha Thang Shi Yu Chiu Fa Kao Sang Chuan, that is record of the eminent monks who travelled to India in search of the Dharma during the Thang. The first text, that is Nanhai Chi Kui Ne Fa Suan, illustrates the monastic regulations prevalent in India in the 8th century and is a comprehensive illustration of the Mool Sarvastivada Vinaya, which covers almost every aspect of the monastic rules, examples which embrace regulations relating to Sanghas, summer retreat, abstinence, monks' robes, ordination, ways of greeting guests and visitors, application of medicine, washing figures of the Buddha, tonsure, proper procedures of wearing kasaya robe, and so on. In order to popularize the proper disciplinary code and salvage the Vinaya from endless arguments, I Ching believed that the sacred writings of the Vinaya originally imported from India had to be made available to the Buddhist population. People had to be given an opportunity to acquire correct knowledge of the monastic rules. Apart from promoting the accurate knowledge of the discipline, I Ching in his work also clarifies some misunderstandings spreading through the Buddhist community in China. For instance, Yi Ching points out that irreversible mistake caused by monks' self-immolation of body parts, whether fingers or genitals, is wrong. Also, a monk's suicide is conceived of as a guilty act only second to parachika, the unpardonable sin that results in expulsion from the order. And as prescribed in the Vinaya canon, looking on or instigating someone to commit suicide or self-destruction constitutes the felony of parachika. Yi Ching in his second text, that is, Tha Thang Shi Yu Chiu Fa Kao Sang Chuan, undertook a course of action to collect and compile the biographies of 56 monks whose contribution to the salvation of the individual and the promotion of universal enlightenment is considered to be indispensable and honorable. His main objective was not only to put down the biographies in praise of the self-sacrificing and adventurous spirit of these eminent monks, but also to establish the immortality of their wonderful accomplishments and brilliant scholarship. On the whole, talking about India, Yi Ching mentions that in the great majority of areas in India, there were followers of both Mahayana and Hinayana. However, he describes northern India and most of the islands of the South Seas, that is Sumatra, Java, etc., as being principal followers of Hinayana. He wrote, there exist in the West numerous subdivisions of the schools which have different origins, but there are only 4 principal schools of continuous tradition. These schools are the Mahasangika, Sthavir, Mool Sarvastivad and Sammitya Nikayas. The written records of Yi Ching's travels contributed to the world's knowledge of the ancient kingdom of Sri Vijaya, as well as providing information about the other human settlements lying on the route between China and India. Account of Buddhism sent from the South Seas and Buddhist monks' pilgrimage of Tang dynasty, records of Buddhist practices in South China and of the Chinese monks who traveled to India in the 7th century are important sources for historians of religion.
In our program Travelogue, you were listening to some of the foreign travelers' account of India and their understanding of Indian culture and civilization. This program came to you from the General Overseas Service of All India Radio.
You are with us on the General Overseas Service of All India Radio. We bring you the commentary India-Nigeria ties set to deepen. It is scripted by Padam Singh, AIR news analyst, and read by Kaushik Rai. India has declared the African region as a top priority area in its foreign policy agenda. India has deepened ties with Nigeria, one of the African continent's rapidly growing economies. India has helped Nigeria in capacity building and training assistance. India has developed or revived several forms of bilateral and multilateral cooperation with Nigeria since 2014. A virtual bilateral meeting was held between India and Nigeria. The foreign ministers of both countries, Dr. S. Jaishankar and Mr. Jeffrey Onyama, held wide-ranging discussions on the entire gamut of India-Nigeria bilateral relations. During the interaction, the two ministers recognized and acknowledged the excellent, long-standing, multifaceted and strategic bilateral ties between the two countries based on mutual friendship and cooperation. India, being the largest democracy in the world and Nigeria, the largest democracy in Africa, share the values of pluralism, inclusiveness and sustainable development for all. Both sides agreed to maintain the momentum in strengthening the excellent ties for the mutual benefit of our two countries and peoples. The discussions covered a wide spectrum of cooperation on political, economic and trade, defense and security, developmental assistance and cultural cooperation. Both sides recalled their extensive cooperation in the field of defense training and capacity building and expressed satisfaction that it was expanding to newer areas such as defense equipment support, medical and maintenance services, sharing of R&D expertise for counter-terrorism and counter-insurgency, and regular exchange of information views. The two ministers noted that the next meeting of the Joint Defense Cooperation Committee will be held later this year in Abuja. The two ministers acknowledged ongoing collaborative efforts through information sharing between the Indian and Nigerian navies and increase of surveillance for maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea, though collaboration between Indian and Nigerian navies. The ministers urged the armed forces of both countries to continue to work together in the ongoing efforts to counter terrorism, insurgency, and piracy. With a bilateral trade turnover of $13.9 billion in 2019-20, India is Nigeria's largest trading partner, and Nigeria is India's largest trading partner in Africa. Despite the COVID-19 challenge, bilateral trade has remained steady, which shows the resilience of our trade economic linkages. Nigeria is a leading energy security partner of India, and both sides agreed to strengthen their cooperation in this sector, including at government-to-government level. Both sides also agreed to expand cooperation in information technology, IT, defense and solar energy projects to be executed through Indian line of credit. Both parties reiterated their commitment to conclude pending MOUs or agreements between the two countries expeditiously. Both sides expressed satisfaction with the signing of the MOU on cooperation in peaceful uses of outer space last month. The Nigerian side expressed appreciation to India for the recent donation of medical supplies in support of the ongoing fight against COVID-19 pandemic and recalled Nigerian participation in recent E-Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation ITEC programs in COVID management organized by the Indian government under the ITEC program. Dr. Jaishankar reiterated India's continued support in technical cooperation and capacity building in diverse sectors of interest to Nigeria. The two sides had facilitated essential travel by their respective citizens and residents over the last 2 months, including the return of over 5,800 Indian nationals to India on 23 flights from Nigeria and over 500 Nigerian and 1,500 permanent Indian residents on 8 flights from India. In this context, they look forward to the operationalization of direct flights between the two countries by the two designated carriers approved by both countries. Dr. Jaishankar thanked Mr. Onyama for Nigeria's support for the safe release of 44 Indian seafarers taken hostage in 3 separate incidents of piracy in the Gulf of Guinea during 2019. India had participated in the G7 Plus Friends of Gulf of Guinea G7 Plus FOGG online meeting last month and has extended its maritime security training programs to Nigeria. A large developing countries, both sides have similar approaches and shared agendas on international issues. They agreed to continue and further strengthen their cooperation and mutual support in multilateral fora, including the UN and WTO. They emphasized that terrorism is a scourge and a threat to the entire world and condemned terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, including violent extremism. That was today's commentary. India-Nigeria ties set to deepen. It was scripted by Padam Singh, AIR news analyst, and read by Kaushik Rai. This broadcast came to you from the General Overseas Service of All India Radio.
This broadcast came to you from the digital channel of the General Overseas Service of All India Radio.